Welcome to episode 2. What does an academic editor do anyway? Today we'll discuss what exactly an academic editor is, the different types of editing, and where freelance editors work. When I was still in academia, I had no idea what a copy editor was or that they worked with scholars to improve their writing and chances of publication. In fact, it wasn't until I published a book with Routledge and I worked with a freelance copy editor employed by the press that I learned this could even be a career option. If you're a strong writer and the type of person who's considering becoming an editor yourself, then it makes sense for you to be unfamiliar with academic editing because you've never needed to hire an editor. In a future episode, we'll discuss working with private clients, the faculty and grad students who hire editors to help them rework their journal articles, book manuscripts, and even job market materials to help them get published or land a job. But today, I'll give you a broad overview of what I call the academic editing landscape, the different types of editing you can do, and the companies and organizations that hire academic editors. Many of the terms I'll use today are commonplace in the professional editing world, but you probably haven't heard of or used them before, especially if you're new to editing. Not to worry, I've got you covered. Stay tuned for my brief introduction to academic editing. Welcome to Leaving Academia, Becoming a Freelance Editor, the podcast. I'm your host, Paulina Cossette. In 2019, I was a political science professor who was fed up with the stress and hostility of academia, not to mention the low pay. I left my tenure-track job and went from barely surviving to thriving as a freelance academic editor. Today, I own Acadia Editing Services, an editing and coaching business that brings in 6 figures a year. In this podcast, I'll discuss the challenges of academia, what academic editing involves, and what life as a freelancer looks like. If you're willing to jump outside your comfort zone, it is possible to find joy, true flexibility, and a profitable and rewarding career as an academic editor. Thanks for listening. If you're a strong writer and you've never worked with an editor before, it makes sense for you to be scratching your head and wondering, what exactly does an academic editor do? Essentially, academic editors edit or revise scholarly documents, journal articles, books, book proposals, and even job market materials and tenure packets. Anything that's written by scholars can be revised by an academic editor. In everyday terminology, you'd likely call this proofreading, but in professional editing and publishing, proofreading and editing have very different meanings. We'll get to this shortly. In addition to revising text, an editor can also take on an advising or coaching role. Many authors appreciate getting feedback from their editor on how they can reduce a paper's word count, which journal or book publisher they should submit to, and similar questions. Some editors take this a step further and begin a coaching wing of their business. There are dissertation coaches, writing coaches, and publishing coaches, to name a few examples. These editors, respectively, help graduate students to finish their dissertation. They work with grad students, postdocs, or faculty to learn how to be more productive and effective writers, including scheduling time to write. Or they help scholars, usually but not always junior faculty, to choose a journal, revise a conference paper or section of their dissertation into a submission for that journal, and rework the text until it's accepted for publication. But if you become an editor, it's up to you how much you want to try any of this. Some editors simply enjoy editing and have no interest in coaching, and that's totally fine. And it's another beautiful aspect of running your own business or freelancing. You have near total flexibility in the directions you take as you gain experience. In general, there are 3 types of editing. Developmental editing involves looking at the big picture of a document. Is it organized well? Is there a clear thesis statement? Is that thesis supported by evidence throughout the paper? This does not involve correcting grammar or formatting the file. Often, developmental editing is done on longer projects like books, but it can also be helpful if someone is struggling to get a journal article published. When you do a developmental edit, you would read through the manuscript and typically draft a report, maybe between 3 and 5 pages, depending on the length of the document you're reviewing. And that report will identify for the author the strengths and weaknesses of the text and some points for them to consider to make the text more likely to be accepted for publication. Let me offer an example of when you might do a developmental edit. Let's say that an author's book proposal has been accepted by a press, and they're preparing the full manuscript to submit to the publisher so it can be sent out for peer review. The author might hire you to do a developmental edit of their book manuscript to check that the overall argument and organization are strong and clear, and to offer suggestions about what they might add or change before submission. A developmental edit is very different from the second type of editing, a copy edit. Copy or line editing is your classic red pen review of a text. It involves reading the document, applying the formatting guidelines, like setting the page margins and page numbers, setting headings to bold or italics, single or double spacing paragraphs, and so on, and correcting errors in spelling, punctuation, and grammar. It also includes rewording sentences to improve clarity and flow, and leaving comments for the author to explain why you made the changes and any areas of the text that are unclear or need attention. Copy editing also typically involves revising the references list to match the publisher's citation style, like APA or Chicago, and cross-checking the items in the list with those that are cited in the text to ensure that they match. The final type of editing is proofreading. In the publishing world, proofreading is a last-minute check of the text before a document is published. If you're working with a private client, like a faculty member or grad student, you don't usually do a true proofread. Rather, the service you would provide would be a copy edit or a developmental edit. A true proofread is usually done for book publishers or academic journals, and it involves looking at the typeset files, typically sent to you as a PDF, to make sure there are no last-minute typos and that everything is showing up correctly on the page. For example, are the images clear? Do the headings overlap with the text? Are any paragraphs uncomfortably close to the margins? These kinds of things. Now that we understand the basic types of editing, we can turn to the question of where do academic editors work? This isn't an exhaustive list, but it gives you a general idea of some options that are available to you as a freelancer. Note that most of these jobs are focused on copy editing or proofreading. This is because developmental editing is usually done early in the process and is requested by the author rather than by a publisher or agency. Bear with me, this will make sense in a few minutes. The first option for freelance employment is working directly for an academic journal. In this role, you would be asked to copy edit the articles for each issue before the issue goes to print. Typically, you would work directly with the managing editor of the journal, who is the liaison with the journal editor and the authors. However, I've worked for two journals and the roles vary widely, so the exact arrangement just depends on the journal. One advantage of this work is that it's a steady paycheck. You know that you're going to be paid for your work on each issue, with most journals published quarterly. However, the jobs can be quite competitive and it can be tough to break in to be considered for a position. Book publishers, or commercial or university presses, also hire freelance editors and proofreaders. As copy editor, you would edit the book, liaise with the authors, incorporate their changes, and then send the files back to your contact at the press. Sometimes this person is referred to as a desk editor. If you're proofreading, you would not interact with the authors, just look over the proofs, mark any errors, and return the files to the press. Related to book publishers are companies that are referred to as packagers. If a university or commercial press doesn't want to handle copy editing, indexing, or other tasks, they might outsource these duties to a packager. For example, Routledge uses a packager called Newgen KnowledgeWorks. That's Newgen KnowledgeWorks. Your role would be the same as if you worked for the press, you just would be hired by the packager instead. Another option that's particularly good for scholars is to work your connections to think tanks or NGOs, non-governmental organizations, to see if they hire freelancers. Many organizations have in-house copy editors who work for them full-time, but some do hire freelancers. It never hurts to contact the publishing or communications departments to ask if they could put you on their list of freelancers. Better yet, if you know someone who works at the institution, ask them to introduce you via email to the appropriate contact person. Next, if you've published a journal article recently, you've probably come across what are sometimes called editing agencies. Often these are branches of publishing companies like Taylor and Francis or Wiley that provide copy editing services to authors. There are also many other companies that are not related to publishers who provide the same services. Examples are Scribendi, Idans, Wordvice, and many, many others. These services are often used by people for whom English is a foreign language, so the texts tend to require heavier edits than what you would be doing for a journal or a book publisher. The pay is also quite low, though not as low as academic presses. Still, the companies can provide reliable work to you and are great options for you to hone your editing skills, especially if you're just starting out. In a future episode, I'll address some common criticisms of editing agencies and explain why I think, despite their downsides, they're still a good place for novice editors to get their start, especially if you have a scholarly background. Finally, we have private clients. This involves you working one-on-one with scholars, usually grad students or faculty, to help them perfect their work and get it published. This is my favorite type of work because I've built relationships with clients whom I've worked with for years now. We talk about our kids, they have me work on multiple projects for them, I get to read their books before anyone else does, and it's a lot of fun to build these relationships. Working for private clients also allows you to earn a higher per word or hourly rate, but it does come with additional time commitments. Finding the clients, marketing, handling contracts, invoicing, chasing payments, and so forth. For these reasons, I typically recommend that new academic editors get started freelancing for other companies and then take on private clients when they're confident with their editing skills. Well, that's a wrap on our introduction to the academic editing landscape. We've really just scratched the surface on this topic, so be sure to tune in to future episodes to learn more. I'll be covering questions like, how do you get hired by an editing agency or press? How do you set your rates? And tips for networking and attracting clients. I'll see you next time. If you're unhappy in academia and you think you might be a good editor or writing coach, check out my course, Becoming an Academic Editor. This digital course is paired with a 12-week group coaching program to support you through your decision to leave academia or not, and to start building a profitable and rewarding academic editing business. Learn more by going to acadiaediting.com/become an editor. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time.